Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Robotics, Gene Editing, Mental Wellbeing. Today we will talk about the future of medtech. It is us here at Danske Bank and SingularityU Nordic that will bring you this webinar. During this 30-minute session we will hear about the medtech industry today, but most importantly we will look into what lies ahead. With us today, we have two keynote speakers. The first, Dr. Habib Frost. Habib is an entrepreneur, inventor, researcher, and physician. He graduated as the youngest medical doctor in Denmark at the age of 23 and was elected Forbes 30 Under 30 and MIT's Innovators Under 35 in 2017. He is the founder and CEO of New Rescue, developing computer-aided medical devices to help emergency patients. Habib is a speaker on the future of medicine and digital biology, having worked with sensors, robotics, and the gene editing technology CRISPR. Welcome, Habib.
Thank you very much.
With us today is also David Bruder. David frequently featured in newspapers around the world, such as New York Post, The Guardian, Dagens Industri. David is also the CEO and co-founder of the personal organizational growth app called Remente. The app combines psychology with brain training to help individuals and businesses reach their full potential by promoting well-being and performance. David has been featured as one of the top 40 serial entrepreneurs under 40 in Sweden by Dagens Industri and has previously co-founded several other successful companies. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. But to kick things off, we're going to start off with the doctor's perspective and hear from Dr. Habib Frost. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Anton, and thank you for the warm introduction. And thank you to Danske Bank for having me here today for this wonderful opportunity to share a bit about the future. And to kick off, I'll share my screen here and start my presentation with you, as we have here. And you will be able to see the first slide now, or else I'm sure someone will interrupt me and tell me. So today I'd like to tell you stories about the future of medicine and how these future technologies will be able not only to improve our own lives, but potentially save the lives of our loved ones as well. In 2001, I became interested in medicine when I had a surgery. I was in school and had sharp stomach pain. And my parents immediately knew that this was something that could require surgery, and we went to the hospital. Here, they discovered that my appendix had ruptured and they needed to do emergency surgery. And I was mesmerized by seeing how they were able to take a condition that 50 years previously might have cost me my life and were able to send me home the day after with a scar. This is Cornelia. In 2015, she had exactly the same condition. And this is how her scars looked like. So this is a remarkable result. And on the contrary, in 2001, this is how my scars felt like. So I asked myself, what was the difference between the surgery that Cornelia had in 2015 and the one that I had in 2001? And the answer was that now the surgeons no longer had to rely on what they could touch with their own hands, and they no longer had to rely on what they could see with their own eyes. By using small keyholes, they were able to do surgery with an absolutely minimal size of openings and therefore also very, very small scars. And the answer to why this was possible was because of the accelerating development in sensors and how year over year they're becoming smaller and more capable. One type of sensing that is in particular painful is the one that patients with diabetes have to experience, where they have to puncture their skin multiple times per day to be able to get their blood sugar reading from their blood. And we can ask ourselves, is there a way with technology today where we can make a difference and improve the quality of care for these many people? Here, the company Abbott developed a patch that goes onto the skin with a mild glue. And by taking their smart device and hovering it over, they're able to get their blood sugar reading without any pain. And this patch only has to be replaced every 14 days, as compared to doing a puncture several times per day to be able to get that exact same reading. And with their latest version, which is the size of a small penny, it automatically even sends this blood sugar reading to the smartphone of the user, so they don't even have to do the hovering motion anymore to be able to get this information. So it's a remarkable change in the quality of life for these patients, not having to do this painful procedure and multiple times per day. If we look a bit further into the future, ahead of the curve, the startup company ViaCyte have found a way where they can potentially cure diabetes altogether. This patch goes under the skin, below the skin by the shoulder, where they have encapsulated insulin producing cells into this nanoprotective coating, which allows glucose and oxygen and other nutrients to enter into this patch for the immune cells to get and it prevents the immune cells from getting access, so that these insulin producing cells in the middle are able to produce insulin at a natural level based on what the blood sugar level is. So functionally, this is a cure for these patients where they no longer have to measure their blood sugar, and they no longer have to inject themselves with insulin to regulate their blood sugar level. So in about 4 to 6 years' time, it's expected to reach the market and is currently in clinical trials. The very first active implant as a cure for a disease was in fact a Swedish invention in Stockholm in 1958, where the doctor and engineer Rune Elmqvist inserted the first implantable pacemaker into a patient. And if we imagine where technology was back then in 1958, the size of this implant was the size of a hockey puck, as you see on the right, and it had to be replaced every few weeks because the battery life was so low compared to what we have today. But still, this was a miracle for these patients, where the alternative would have been certain death. If we fast forward to today, we now every day implant pacemakers that are the size of a standard paperclip, where we don't even have to open up the chest, but we can inject it through a blood vessel in the leg and then put it up via a catheter into the heart itself, so we don't even have any scars on the chest for these patients. And if we go a few years into the future, which is one of the main reasons we're here today, we can get these implants down to the size of a grain of rice, which means we can implant it around the nerves that regulate our blood pressure, around nerves that cause chronic pain from our legs or arms or from our back, and even can use it as a cure for asthma, allowing for these implants to be put next to each of the nerves near the lungs, so that we, similar to noise canceling headphones, can detect if an asthma attack is about to happen and then cancel out the asthma attack before it happens, which for more than 160,000 patients each year who die from their asthma attack could be a wonderful and revolutionary change for them. Because even if they take their medication as they should, they're still at a risk for an asthma attack to take their life. All of us now have smartphones with advanced sensors, and one of them is that our phones are able to detect each one of us as compared to everybody else on the planet. So this kind of sophistication in software we can also use for diagnostics in medicine, for detecting disease. And in 2018, the first company got FDA approval from the most stringent authority in the world, the Medical Device and Drug Approval Authority in the US, for using software, for using a piece of AI that was trained to diagnose cancer, to be able to diagnose cancer, instead of requiring only physicians with more than 20 years of training to be able to do this. And in their own words, This piece of software, Arteris, on average takes 15 seconds to produce a result for one case, where a specialist requiring more than 20 years of training would spend 30 minutes to 1 hour on working on that same case. So we can imagine how in the many different areas of medicine, we can now leapfrog directly to using software to produce these results. For example, for low-income countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, areas of Latin America, where we simply don't have enough physicians, we can now use different types of software that different startup companies are developing to directly either expand the capabilities of each of these doctors or directly replace the need for having these limited amount of doctors entirely. So I believe the future belongs to those companies that are able to leverage this accelerating development as compared to those companies who do not leverage this development. Because even as time is passing, you're able to leverage from these performance and price benefits over time while still using energy on maintaining and running a good business. The most accelerating technology we've ever come across is the technology behind life itself with DNA. Every single plant, every animal, every human being runs on the same source code. And in fact, the cost to sequence a genome from each one of us is the most accelerating curve we've ever seen, even expanding Moore's law, which is the development we're seeing in computer power. So that in 2001, it cost more than $100 million, the same price as a double-decker jumbo airplane, to get the DNA information from just one patient, where today the cost is the same as just one ticket on one of these airplanes. On the left, you see one of the machines used in 2001, so the size of this room behind me. And on the right, we now have them as small as that we can plug them into our smartphones. And so one thing is being able to read and write DNA, where we take the reading process and do it in reverse. What if we want to change DNA in someone who's already living or in a living organism that already has grown up? Here in 2012, we came across the most exciting biotech discovery of the century with the technology known as CRISPR. And CRISPR allows us to change every single letter in any DNA, no matter how long that DNA is, including inside human patients. And so we now have the power of a word processor to be able to change the code as we desire for beneficial purposes. So we now can cut, copy, and paste DNA anywhere where we see it and have that full power to edit DNA inside genomes. This is Layla. In 2015, her parents got some of the worst news any parent can imagine, where they were told that she had cancer, she had leukemia, and that none of the existing treatments with chemotherapy or radiation therapy was able to cure her. And every single cancer we've ever come across is DNA code that goes bad with mutations that makes them different than the DNA in the healthy cells. And here Layla was very fortunate that this happened in 2015, where the company Selectis was able to take out her immune cells with a blood sample, and then using technologies similar to CRISPR, they were able to edit the DNA in her immune cells so that her immune cells would specifically target and go after her cancer cells and kill these cancer cells. Then these modified immune cells, these genetically engineered immune cells, were infused back into Layla. And in 2015, she was the first human patient who was cured from her cancer using this power of DNA technology. So that's something that's potentially a way for us to cure every single cancer case in every single human patient. This is Creed. He was born with the DNA that he inherited from his parents, and he was born blind because of one single letter that was wrong in his DNA. That means that in the back of his retina, he was missing a protein that would convert light into electrical signals for his brain to be able to interpret these vision signals. And in 2018, he was injected with artificially DNA synthesized virus that was designed inside a computer. And this virus was programmed to give back this protein that Creed was missing, to change that one single letter where Creed's DNA was different than most of us, so that he was cured from his blindness and already 1 month after was able to play with a toy train set on his own. And today he's on a basketball team with the same level of vision as almost all other children of his age. And we all have natural variation in our DNA that gives us superpowers, where some people are resistant to HIV, some have a very low risk of developing heart disease, some people don't get the common cold, the norovirus, and some people have higher learning capability than others, just with one single letter of differences as compared to the majority. And in 2018, what I would consider the Sputnik satellite moment of our generation happened when Dr. He Jiankui genetically modified a pair of healthy twin girls before they were born so that they would have resistance to HIV. But there were wide condemnation from across the world on where should we put the limit for when we use these technologies. Should we use it just to treat disease, or should we allow it to be used to change DNA, to give superpowers to people for reasons that we would not consider disease at all? Here on this chart on the left, you see what killed people in the year 1900 with diarrhea, gastrointestinal infections, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and what kills people today in the US in the year 2010, where it's now cancer and heart disease. And my prediction is that with the technologies we've shortly described today, that we will be able to tackle cancer and heart disease into 2030s, so that we will now live long enough that for most of us, it will be brain disease that will be the primary cause of illness. And I hope you will take part in ensuring that these wonderful opportunities in technology will not only help benefit a select elite minority, but that we, with our investments and our business leadership, will help ensure that we give not only a very long life to a select few, but good and long lives to as many people as possible. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Habib, for that. That was really interesting. And stay with us, because at the end we will try to get time for some questions from the audience. Now I will perform a short interview with David Bruder. As I mentioned before, he's the co-founder of the app Remente that we will learn more about. Hello, David.
Hello.
Could you tell us shortly a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I've spent the past 15 years as entrepreneur, starting different businesses ranging from nanotechnology to e-commerce marketplaces. And that's really what I feel is my passion in life. But it also has, or at least for me, it had a downside in the sense that I was working around the clock and realized the hard way that the way I was leading my life from a mental health perspective wasn't sustainable. Because what I understood happened was that, the first thing I thought about in the morning when I woke up was work and stress, anxiety related to that. And that was also the last thing I was thinking about before going to bed. And that turned into a vicious cycle. And it got that far that my dear wife advised me to maybe you should go and see a psychologist. And my initial reaction to that was, well, I'm not crazy, right? So, I'm trying to become a successful entrepreneur. And you tell me I should go and seek help. That is like admitting defeat. So obviously I didn't do that. But in that process, what I started to do was starting to read a lot of books in personal development. And how to take better care of yourself and your health, etc. And I realized rather quickly that all these different theories and methods were saying more or less the same thing, but with different packaging. And I got a lot of inspiration from it. But then I went back to work or doing the things I've always have done the same way I always did them. So I got a lot of inspiration, but it didn't transform into behavioral change. And the last insight I got from all that was probably it isn't such a bad idea to go see a psychologist. But you know, how do you do that? So okay, I'm from Sweden, so we have, you know, this welfare system that could support us to get more or less free healthcare. And I could say I could go and do this privately to find a psychologist. Whoa, that was really expensive. And then I had advice from a friend said, well, go see your doctor and you can get a prescription to go see a psychologist. And I did that. And that was a big step for me, because to me, that was about admitting something that I never had talked about. And this was, you know, plus 10 years ago. So there's a stigma around these topics already today. It was even more so back then. So I did that. I got the prescription and I thought, good, now I'll get to see a psychologist in 1 week or so. And that 1 week turned into 1 month and 3 months. And when I got to visit this psychologist, I basically understood that I was lucky to get an appointment, because I was not on sick leave. I was still working, maintaining my regular life, even if I was more or less feeling like crap on the inside mentally. So I wasn't really a prioritized case. And that whole process started to get me thinking on how are we really addressing our mental health today. And looking at myself, what I had been doing was running a mental marathon without having prepared for it, you know, working around the clock, but I wasn't giving myself, you know, the proper rest or reflection and stress management. And I realized I was not alone, because I started to look into the statistics and realized that actually mental health conditions are today the #1 cause to sick leave. And everybody talk about how stressed they are. No one is doing anything, and we don't know what or how to do anything about this. So can we change that? And the assumption I had back then is that if we're going to start solve this, we have to focus, you know, on this topic from a prevention standpoint. Because physically, just looking at myself, I had, you know, since I was young, understood the importance of taking care of my physical health. But mentally, I was running that marathon with no preparation. And now I really saw the worst case outcome of that was that I was on the verge of burning out. And having a background from technology development and digital products, I realized, okay, we have the phones. And what we actually know today is that our smartphones are, they can affect our mental health negatively, but they're also amazing devices when it comes to distributing information and engaging users. So what if we take those mechanisms and connect them to positive behavioral change, instead of just leveling up in a game or try out that jackpot slot machine one more time? So that was the kind of the foundation to Rementi. And then we got a lot of experts in mental health and well-being, and said, okay, can we take this knowledge that really isn't affordable for everyone, it isn't accessible for everyone or understandable for everyone, if we put it in an app and distribute it to everyone, hopefully more people will be able to access these methods and tools so that they could lead better, more balanced and productive lives. And it has been a long journey. This idea started about 10 years ago, and nowadays mental health is a topic all over the news. And I could tell you at that point, people, when we started this out, people were telling us that you cannot do this with a phone. You cannot help people with their mental health through an app. And they literally thought we were crazy. But today we have testaments of users who are using this system and from across the globe, and they tell us that we're helping them manage their ADHD, depression, coming back from a burnout, or even just handing in study assignments for school in time. So we've come a small step in our mission, which is to democratize mental well-being.
It's really, really interesting. Are there more problems that Remente are trying to solve, or what do you see in the future for Remente?
Well, I think I think Habib very beautifully described the evolution and development of healthcare. And, I mean, it's really impressive to see how far we've come in many fields. But if we look at mental health, if we single that out as an area, not so much has happened in the past 50 years, unfortunately. And by 2030, the World Health Organization estimates that depression could be the #1 global burden of disease. There are already today findings showing that mental health issues cost society more than cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer put together. And we're doing, there's in relation to that, we're putting in very, very little effort into this space. So there's been very little development in this space, but there's so much potential here. And I think we have been able to show that at a very, very small scale with our technology. But there's so much more to do. And I think specifically, if we look at mental health as an area, I think what's happening right now that is really exciting is one, are digital therapy tools, digital treatments as a substitute or replacement to medicine, and also psychotherapy, where they are using more or less psychedelic drugs, psilocybin, MDMA, basically magic mushrooms, and in other cases, what is known as ecstasy, MDMA, for PTSD and depression treatments. And the initial indications they're seeing here are, they get phenomenal results from psychotherapy-assisted treatments, where you both have normal therapy from a psychiatrist combined with these hallucinogenics, basically. So I think there is a lot of potential, and I could take an example. So let's say that, and that also, it becomes a bit anecdotal, because that goes back to my experience of going to see a psychologist. So before going into therapy, I had very little knowledge of, what am I to expect here? And during therapy, very much, I had about 12 sessions. And during these sessions, a big part of this session was about what I should have done, the assignment. So this was cognitive behavioral therapy. So I got, you're supposed to take short breaks until next time we meet. So I got that assignment verbally or maybe on a printed paper. And next session was about, okay, David, until this session, you were supposed to do this and this. Did you do that? Oh, no, I forgot because life came in between, which was, of course, my own responsibility. But that's what happens with us human beings. We are habitual creatures, and our brain is designed to take the shortcut, the path to least resistance when it comes to behaviors. And that is often sticking to our existing behaviors, be it good or bad. So, so that was one thing, that the treatment probably wasn't as efficient as it could be. And if I went to the psychologist and said, okay, so how do you feel today, David? And I also, well, I feel like shit. Okay, why is that? So the psychologist in that case doesn't have all the data. She doesn't know how I have been sleeping, how's my nutrition, what have I been doing in the past week that might influence my, current emotional state. And what we also know with the brain is, our brain is in principle in our last emotional state, which is our last 20 minutes. So if everything feels like it sucks right now, it's like life sucks, everything sucks. So we're not rational from that perspective. With the help of data, if there would be possibility to log everything from sleep to nutrition to what I have been doing through that past week, there's a possibility to draw correlation based on that data. So both myself and the psychologist would then be able to make much more informed decisions on my ongoing treatment. and this is something you do in many other areas of healthcare, but when it comes to therapy, it's, as I said, the development hasn't really been there in the past years. So also the fact that development or efforts put in today when it comes to specifically mental health are focused on healthcare rather than prevention. So it's, the supply demand issue we have here. There are so many people that need help, which for an example, the ongoing pandemic has, accelerated this further. So there aren't enough people to help treat everyone that needs help. So we need systems, we need supporting systems, and we need to act from a prevention standpoint in order to solve this. So I think one of the keys are, prevention, and their digital tools will play a major role going forward. I think also genetics, DNA, which Habib talked about, could be super exciting in this area as well. So there's a lot to be done going forward, definitely.
It's super exciting, and I'm hoping to hear more about this in the future. We're almost out of time, but I think the subject is so interesting that we will take some of the most pressing questions here that's most interesting and see if we can get some answers to them. I'll start with one for you, Habib. How can we prevent gene editing, CRISPR, that it won't be misused in any way?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I think the answer there is that we have more people who are working very hard to do things that are good than there are people who are trying to do things that are evil or malicious. And that we've seen that with every technology, that there have always been more people who want to use it for beneficial purposes. If it's nuclear technology or if it's solar panels versus what we're seeing now with other types of chip technology, that fortunately that we've always seen that the number of people who want to fight for benefiting humanity exceed the ones who want to use it for malicious purposes. But the technology is out of the bag now, and it doesn't require that many people or that many resources to use CRISPR. So we will see that many different variations of how this will be used will come to play out there in the world now that the technology has been shared, so that's something that will be very hard for us to prevent.
Regarding CRISPR or the digital changes in medtech, how will this affect the ordinary patient, so to speak, or is it just the doctors and experts that will notice the change?
No, it will certainly affect ordinary patients. We will see that the healthy lifespans will increase. The way we may organize our lives will change over the coming decades. If you know that you have a good chance of living to 110 years of age, will you spend more years on education? Will you look at insurances and investments differently? It will have massive consequences for all of us, and we will see the benefits, and healthcare personnel will see that they will be able to do much more than they're able to do today with one patient at a time, by seeing the additional benefits of how technology can help them do the best work that they can.
Thank you. I have a question here for you, David. Conversations regarding mental health and mental well-being previously has been pretty stigmatized. How do you think the focus on mental well-being will look like in the future?
I think what we have experienced in the, I would say, past 2 years, we do see actually a shift, whereas mental well-being is addressed, or mental health as a topic that is something that we need to talk about, which it obviously is, and both by, I would say specifically where I see a change is within organizations. They realize that they actually need to have tools in order to take care of employees from a holistic well-being perspective, whereas mental health is one of the biggest issues. As I mentioned, number one cause to sick leave. It also affects performance, productivity, and finally, what I think the world is realizing, that, and specifically businesses, is that well-being and performance are not two different things. They're two sides of the same coin. And what we could see is that the costs of not taking care of mental health, the suffering, it's really accelerating. And this has been even more so in this pandemic, where we see that one of the major side effects, both from the situation itself, the pandemic, because it brings so much uncertainty, which our brain doesn't really like. It needs to know where it's going, otherwise it much more easily gets into stress. So this is a textbook example of what happens if we aren't mentally resilient. So we see that mental. We see that the pandemic is taking a big toll right now on general mental health. One of the side effects also from COVID-19 patients is that you could see that one of the big prolonged issues several of them are facing are issues related to their mental health. They go in a depressive-like state. So I think, well, I wouldn't say it's fortunate, but hopefully one of the outcomes of this pandemic is that mental health will be taken even more seriously. And it really has to be, because we've seen the development in recent years it's not going the right way. We see mental health conditions are going both up and down in ages. And what Habib actually explained, that he believed, I think it was 2030 or so, or in the future at least, the main diseases we need to work with are brain disease. So then it also means that we need to equip the brain to be well prepared for a long life. And that's more or less about, in many cases, mental training.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think both the pandemic and the 2020 has been trying times for people's mental well-being. Hopefully it will brighten up next year. I have a question for you, Habib. Does the world have enough resources for people living much longer? Because you mentioned that in your presentation. What about overpopulation?
Yeah, so what we're seeing with these technologies is that we're also increasing our ability to be able to sustain and nurture a larger population. So with especially solar technology is an exponential technology where we're predicting that over 10 to 15 years, we'll be able to create so much electricity with solar power, so solar panels, that we'll be able to create an abundance of drinking water with desalination. With electricity and water, we'll be able to grow food in using hydroponics and aeroponics, where we'll be able to grow them in facilities and be able to have construction of homes happen at a much cheaper pace, and cheaper and quicker pace. So there will be a time where we have to take very, very smart decisions on behalf of the planet in the next 10 years to avoid that things do not become much worse before they get better. But the trajectory of technology is that we don't expect that the 12th billionth person will ever be born, because we have fewer children as well, with higher levels of education and higher levels of sanitation. And at the same time, we'll see technology be able to provide more than enough food and education with digital technologies and housing over enough long of a time span, if we look at it from that perspective. But it does not mean that we're protected from really ensuring that we take good care of our planet until that time comes.
Thank you. Since we are out of time and there are more questions, but I will ask one final question for both of you. We can start with you, David. What's your number one advice to living healthier today, both physically and mentally?
Well, I would say one is be kind to yourself, and because often we are our own worst judge. If we would look at ourselves, if we would judge others as we do with ourselves, we wouldn't come off as so nice persons. And the brain is really designed in a way that it gets triggered by small wins. So I think if we are, one thing is to start to be kind to ourselves and asks ourselves, am I in the driver's seat or the passenger seat of my life, because we live in a information society where we are constantly bombarded by all these impressions and distractions, so we get carried away, which results in us not being especially mindful because we just go on autopilot. So take every day, just take a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and ask yourself, what's the most important thing that needs to happen for me today to feel well at the end of the day? One thing I can achieve today, what could that be? And try to do that thing. So thinking about it, super important, but then even more importantly is acting, and be kind to yourself in the process. I mean, everybody has 5 minutes. No one can say that they don't have 5 minutes per day to spend and just reflect and think what's important, but it's still difficult because we're wired and so connected to our old habits. So even if you aren't able to do it today or tomorrow, it doesn't matter, as long as you don't give up. And so be kind to yourself in that process, and try to just reflect every day, think about what's important and act on that. That's a small step that could take you really far if you are able to apply that continuously.
Really good advice. Thank you very much. How about you, Habib? Do you have any top advice?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful advice. I would continue and say, be kind and present for others. One thing we've seen increase health more than anything is maintaining good social relations. And here we're not talking about 50 or 100 people. We're talking just about 2 or 3 or 4 persons where you can speak profoundly and truthfully about what's going on in your life and exactly tell how things are going at work, how things are going, in your family. So be sure to invest into having those close friendships, and mutually be available for them as well, because we've seen that work better than any drug, than any advice for food or exercise, even to maintain, to ensure to invest into maintaining those 2, 3, or 4 intimate, deep friendships where both can really tell things exactly as they are. Besides that, to eat plant-based nutrition as much as possible, plant-based instead of from animal sources, and then also go for just even going for one walk every day. It has tremendous benefits that you gain compared to if you become a marathon runner. You gain so much just with the first amount of effort. So, go for a walk or make these traditions or rituals to put in some cardio rather than necessarily exercising for cosmetic reasons. So that would be my advice to maximize health potential.
Super advice as well. I'm going to write down both of your advices. It's been really good. Thanks so much to both of you for being with us today. And a huge thank you for everyone watching today. I hope you found it interesting and something maybe inspiring and learning about it. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep innovating. Thank you so much.